Fig trees are one of the most delicious and rewarding fruit trees you can grow, especially for beginners, but pruning them can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. So in this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about how, where, and when to prune. And at the end, not only am I going to make the cuts, but you'll see how this grew in after the fact. Here's my beautiful yellow long neck fig. I've had it for a little over a year now, and it's grown quite well, even though it looks a little bit weird and there are no leaves on it, which is the perfect time to prune. You do not want to prune your fig when it is actively growing. You want to prune when it's dormant. So it is winter here in San Diego, and I've got no leaves. Perfect time to do it. Why? Because figs grow on new wood only. What that means is I won't be seeing any figs coming off of this part right here. I won't be seeing any come off of this part right here. I'll see it come off of the new growth that comes out this season, which brings us to the first reason to prune. Take a look at this right here. If I have figs shooting up out there, I'm gonna need to get up on a ladder just to harvest those figs. I don't want that. I want a fig that's kind of nice and bushy, just like this. So I need to bring these branches down. So let's take this branch right here. I think it's a bit too long. And a general rule of thumb with fig pruning is you either want to hard prune a branch back or just let it be completely. In this case, it's long enough that I want to hard prune it back. Remember, no figs off of this, figs way up here. Let's bring it all the way back down to here. So for a larger branch, you can bring it all the way down to like 2 to 4 inches from the point at which that branch branches off from the main stem. I'm gonna use a pruning saw for this one because it's quite thick. By the way, do not throw away any of these cuttings. I'll show you the easiest way to make some cool, fun figs for free. So I've made my first cut. This I want new growth from. If you notice, I have this big fruit tree that I don't really need these branches coming off into this tree. And this would be the same for you if you had maybe a wall that they were running into or a patch that it's just annoying to have the fig coming in that direction. If you have that situation, you actually want to cut flush and don't leave any opportunity for new growth to sprout out. So in this case, I'm actually gonna remove this branch completely. So I've got a bunch of these little branches that are kind of running into the ground, and they're really close to the bottom of the plant here, and they're really not gonna do much, especially when this top part fills in. So I'm just gonna come in with my shears and just clip those off as flush as I can, because again, I don't want those at all. So I don't wanna give them the opportunity to produce more. Now, knowing the general principles, figs grow on new wood, although there are some figs called Breva figs that will grow on last year's old wood. You don't really have to worry about them. They don't produce too many. So I'd rather prune my plant correctly than worry about maybe cutting off a fig that may have come a little bit early in the season. So don't worry about that at all. But now it's just your choice as a gardener. How do you want to shape and scape this plant for the coming season? So the general rule of thumb is if you're cutting back a really large branch like this, bring it down to about 2 to 4 inches. But if you're cutting back a smaller branch, maybe something like this, which in this case I actually won't cut back because I like the shape of it and I like where it is, but you can come even closer, about 1 inch or so. So right now, what I'm doing is I'm saying, where do I want this plant to be in a few months? What new growth do I want to come out? What do I want to de-emphasize? So in this case, I have a very long branch right here that I actually think it has the chance to probably double its height. New figs are gonna come too high. I'm gonna cut this one down. Similarly right here, this is way, way, way out. I've had a couple years of good figs off of this. I wanna reset it low. Again, bringing this one back down. So most of the smaller branches, I actually wanna leave. Take this one, for example. I really like the positioning of it. It's not super long, and you don't wanna prune everything all the way back. If you have a fig, maybe you have left to grow for a couple years, maybe even longer, and you're doing a full rejuvenation pruning on it, I would recommend not taking every single branch back down, because the fig will say, yo, I'm dying, and it'll start throwing out a crazy amount of growth the next year. So take about 1/3 of it down. I'm gonna be a little bit more aggressive than that, maybe taking about 40% off. So take this one right here. If I wanna bring this one back, because it's a bit smaller, I think I can get away with coming just a bit closer to this emanation point right here. So this might be a little bit of a sin in the world of pruning, but I'm gonna remove this branch completely because it's kind of bowing downwards, and it has a ton of branching here that is super low, and there's some grafts that are unknown to me. My main stem is really where I want a lot of my growth, right? I don't want this one coming and jamming itself down into the ground, especially because it's basically creating like this huge branching structure over here. So I'm gonna take this one off completely. So here's the top of my tree, even though it's on the side, and I'm gonna take some of these down because it's gonna wanna keep shooting out this way and that's gonna become very unruly. So I'm sort of trying to make this fig be more in this direction, bush out in this area and not keep extending out this way. If you think about it, if you were to right size this fig, you'd say you're just taking the height down, right? That's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just taking sort of more of the horizontal height down. So because these are thinner, smaller, younger branches, I can prune these down a bit more. So I'm gonna prune these down to about 1 inch or so. So you can see what I've done here. We've got a lot less length over here. We've come down on the overall height and we've removed stuff that's growing in an unproductive direction, but we have left 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe about 10 stems completely untouched. Why? Because I actually do have new little tips of growth coming out here. And if you get in very closely, you can see what are called embryonic figs. These are the figs that will be coming out this season. So by doing this prune, even in the winter, because it's my climate, it's quite warm here, I'm removing some actual figs, but I'm gonna get new growth coming out of these areas this season, so I still will get figs off of that new growth. But I've got my bundle of fig cuttings here. I wanna show you, while we wait for this to grow in, how to make more figs the easiest way possible. So I've got some of the cuttings that I took off, and this is a really good time to just make more figs, whether you wanna grow one maybe in a container, or you wanna give one to a friend, or you just want more in your garden. So take the youngest cuttings that you have. You probably took a decent amount off when you did the initial pruning. I took the young ones because they are the most sprightly, they've got the most vigor in them. You just wanna make sure that they're not damaged in any way. If you're pruning in winter like we just did, you might have some sort of frost damage on the tips. Discard those. You might see them a bit shriveled. You don't want those either. And you only need about 1 foot. You don't need this entire portion. So I like to come down and count the nodes. I've got the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 1 foot worth of height. That's about all I need. I could even get away with maybe going to somewhere around there or so. I'm gonna make my cut. I can discard the rest, or I can actually even root that rest. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut all these down to size. So I've got them cut down, and you can put these in their own pot if you want to, but you're probably gonna end up transplanting that and separating it out in some fashion. So if you have a bunch of figs to make cuttings of, you can just go ahead and put them in a big grow bag like this. This is sort of a standard potting mix. You could use peat moss vermiculite perlite if you want to, or you could just use kind of whatever you have lying around, because figs are probably the easiest fruit tree in the world to propagate. You can stick them just like this into some soil mix, and you can put about 4 nodes underground if you want to, just like that. They're gonna develop roots across the entirety of that stem coming out of those nodes, and you can space them out just a bit like this. Just kind of eyeball it however you want for the amount of figs that you're putting in. You can also root figs in water. You can also root figs on the plant in a process called air layering. You can also root figs in a process called ground layering, where you keep it on the plant and put it in the ground and it'll start to sprout up. Like I said, they are very, very simple plants to propagate. They help you build a lot of confidence as a beginning fig tree or fruit tree grower. So I've got my 5 cuttings in here. It'll probably take about 2-ish weeks for them to set root. It'll take a couple more months for them to really get large. And at that point, I can pull them out, cut the roots apart from one another, put those in the ground, or put them in a container. It's been a couple months, needed some patience, and we're starting to see some growth, guys. So take a look. All of the areas that I left the growing tip, so these leaves here, these leaves here, this leaf here, we're actually starting to see some really nice growth, not only of leaves, but the growing shoot is starting to develop. So I'm gonna get a lot of growth coming straight up off of those. But more importantly, we have some baby figs developing, but we also have some really interesting new shoots developing. So if you take a look at some of these areas that we cut a few months back, you're starting to see exactly what I wanted to happen is happening. I'm gonna get a nice new growth coming out this way on this. I'm gonna get one shooting up here over here, and I've got some other stuff shooting out over here. So the technique has actually worked. In fact, this is probably the best example of a heading cut here that's taken some of that height down and forced the fig to produce new growth, which of course is where those figs are gonna come from, lower on down the plant. And if you look really close, you can actually see a whole lot more areas where small, tiny either figs or branches are starting to develop. While we're at it, let's take a look at some of the figs that I propagated. So these were from the cuttings from the fig out in the front. And obviously, you see some growth up top, which doesn't actually always mean that you have good root set below. So I'll show you what I like to do. I just do a tug test. So if I tug this and it's not moving at all, similarly here, I know I've got some nice roots, because sometimes you'll get surprised on figs. They'll still grow out of the top and there just won't be anything below. So these 5 figs we'll actually be giving away at the end of this video, but these are just so great to give to friends when you're pruning a fig, because everyone wants a little free plant, right? You can even just grow this as a house plant if you want to give it to someone who doesn't really get the edible game, but they're doing well. So we'll check back in a few months and see how the big fig out front has done. It has been 4 months since we started this fig pruning journey, and I have to say, I am very pleased with the results. You saw how we decided to prune in the first place. You saw some of the buds that came out after that pruning took place. And now you're seeing the fruit and I guess leaves of our labor here. So remember, this was a tree where the main branch is kind of going out horizontally. So a lot of the way that I prune this is to keep it in this shrubby bush style structure instead of shooting it straight up like a tree. And I have to say, that's more or less exactly what happened. We have this longer guy over here, and then these, which would normally be the lateral shoots coming off of the main trunk, which would be more vertical, are kind of going straight up, and there's a bunch of them growing in this bushing style structure. So a lot of growth here. I'm not gonna do anything now until I actually get some fruit off of this plant, which will be later in the season. But remember, we took cuttings earlier, so I wanna show you those because they're actually rooted up as well. Over here in the greenhouse, all of those cuttings that we initially pruned off 4 months ago have rooted. I just stuck them in some grow bag soil. There's nothing fancy about it at all. It's just in one of our Epic grow bags here. I folded down the side to give them a little more access to sun. Normally, I would say you do like a tug test. Make sure that they're all rooted. I don't need to do that. These are obviously well rooted with all these leaves. So what you can do now is grab a trowel and just separate them out, chunk them into their own pots, give them to family or friends, or even grow another fig grove somewhere else on your property. But this is why figs aren't grafted. Most fruit trees, stone fruits and citrus, all that kind of stuff, it's grafted. You have a rootstock and you have a graft that grows above. Fig tree, you can just cut, stick in the soil. It's perfectly good to go. So this video has taught you not only how to prune fig trees, but how to clone your favorite varieties and make even more. Hopefully this was helpful. Subscribe, and if you want to grab some fig trees, we actually offer a few shipped directly to your door at shop.epicgardening.com. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.